Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and I just got back from the new film, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. It's a lot different from your usual summer blockbuster, and it has a lot more to say than you'd really expect from a major studio film. It's surprising, and that's really what you want from a Planet of the Apes film, a good Planet of the Apes film, to surprise you. Whether you think about the 1968 original film with the surprise Statue of Liberty ending, or Beneath the Planet of the Apes just simply because that film exists, or Rise of the Planet of the Apes, that ended up being as good as it was. And Dawn of the Planet of the Apes doesn't disappoint at all. It's more of a complex film, it's a much darker film. It's not really a good versus evil film. It's two sides that are in very desperate situations, trying to do what's right for their communities, the apes and the humans. And certainly there are people who are kind of antagonistic in certain parts and do evil things to make their society do one thing or the other, but either side isn't portrayed as entirely evil. It's more of a complex argument. A lot of people have said it has a lot to do with what's going on in Israel and Palestine, and especially recently there, but I think it's actually a lot more universal, and it's something I've seen in other films, like particularly Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. It makes war look harsher and conflict look harsher than you really expect from a lot of summer blockbusters, but it's refreshing to see a film like this that its first 15-20 minutes where mostly the apes only communicate with sign language. It's one of the few Planet of the Apes films I think that spends more time with the apes than humans, and does it magnificently. I'm surprised this worked as well. It's very audience friendly while still not losing its soul, and surprisingly how much more I wanted to be watching stuff to do with the apes. The human plotline is kind of minimized. If it was more of a human heavy film, it would be a lot weaker. Really, Caesar's kind of the star of the film. I mean, Andy Serkis, he's really the connective tissue through this franchise, and he's who you want to follow, but I think he's the more interesting side. The humans almost feel more corruptible for a lot of it than the apes are, because they have such a great leader in Caesar. All the ambition this film has while still being a big summer movie is kind of remarkable, and it's just like an amazing thing to witness, really. I was both surprised at what I was watching, but I could also understand that as a mainstream blockbuster audience member and not be so far removed from either. This film opens on the apes, and you see their society and how well they've been doing. It's been 10 years since the simian flu, which the film opens up showing what happened during those 10 years. Well, briefly, I think almost 90% of the world's population was killed off, or the human population, and the apes have been thriving in the woods where they went after the first film, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, and they actually haven't seen a human in about 2 years, or 2 winters as they call it, until 2 sons of apes from the last film comes across a human and gets shot, and Caesar doesn't really want a conflict. He's afraid of losing apes, and he's trying to have them live in peace and harmony with one another. He goes to where the humans are living in this colony in San Francisco to show that they have a lot of numbers and they can fight back if they need to, but that they should leave each other alone. But the humans really need to use a dam water power plant because they don't have power. They have a limited amount of power left with the power supply they've been using all this time, so they're trying to use this dam and have access to it, but it's really close to where the apes live, and so they have to cooperate with the apes and try to get along until a major conflict erupts and everything goes wrong. The most important character of this franchise is Caesar, and this film cares a lot about character, a lot more than you'd really expect from a mainstream studio blockbuster. It's almost more important what happens with these character arcs to get you to a certain place. And Caesar is a very interesting character. He's grown quite a bit in those 10 years. He's a stronger leader. He's a lot older. He's a father. He has 1 son. He has pretty much a wife, and he's been helping run the society after he let all those apes free and started kind of an ape revolution, and they live in the woods by themselves. Andy Serkis can do that so well with his presence. He seems to be getting even better at doing this kind of motion capture acting. Obviously, a lot of that respect goes to the animators in the film also, but his performance, the physicality to it, is just really remarkable. A lot of the times when Caesar walks into somewhere and all the apes pay attention, he has this presence about him physically. He physically walks a certain way, like he's the leader, and Andy Serkis seems to get that so well. He's the dreamer. He's the hopeful character that this will work out, that him and the humans can work together, and that the apes will want to do that. Even though he has such a conflict with Koba, who's played by Toby Cabell, he also does a pretty remarkable motion capture performance as well. And just like the physical nature of these performances, but also obviously a lot of that was helped by the animators as well. They're really the conflict in this film, and it's really more about opposing views. You also have Jason Clarke on the human side, and his life almost echoes Caesar's in a way, and he's kind of the human character, but it almost feels like this film has like evolved in a way where they're like, yeah, we're not going to do the Planet of the Apes thing where it relies on the human character to get you through this. Like, you know, Caesar at this point, he's the only character from the last film, and so you as an audience should be able to get through this film with Caesar rather than having Jason Clarke introduce things to you. I don't think the human characters are that great, but the little they use them really works for it, because you're not getting annoyed about some plot point. Certainly there are certain parts that don't really work, like particularly Judy Greer plays Caesar's wife, or girlfriend, or lady who has his kids or whatever. That never really connects, and there's a few things that seem a little superfluous, might have been cut down. This has a 2-hour, 10-minute runtime, which isn't extremely excessive. I was just surprised at everything this film accomplishes, and how it kind of surprised me, just the same way Rise of the Planet of the Apes did, and like a good Planet of the Apes movie really should. I was very surprised at how they treated the characters, and how there really wasn't an antagonist, how it really felt like more of a well-rounded story with a well-rounded conflict. This is a prequel film, and there's no parts in it where they're like, and I will name my son Dr. Zaius. The Planet of the Apes film actually takes place in like 3000 something, so they could make these sequels for a long time without having to introduce characters who are in the 1968 original film. These films are a lot better for it because they're not as tied to the original franchise as most prequels are. I'm kind of wondering if Caesar is the lawgiver that they refer to in the original films. He doesn't look like the lawgiver to me. Clearly there was a major nuclear bomb explosion in the past in the original Planet of the Apes. When is that going to happen? What's the deal with the spaceship that Charlton Heston was on that was going on that mission? Did that launch before the simian flu? There's a lot of questions I have like that. The good thing is this film isn't interested in answering those questions. It's just interested in building the apes eventually taking over. Much like how Rise of the Planet of the Apes is the beginning, what happened with Caesar and the apes having a higher consciousness. And then in this film, it's more about them taking over and interacting with the humans and being someone they're in conflict with and have to reason with. It brings a bunch of conflicts between nations. It works in more of a universal way, not so much of a direct way. I think a lot of people are going to say that, but I don't necessarily agree. I love big studio films that can do something different. Certainly you look at a film like Godzilla, it tried to do something different. It kind of succeeded, sort of, a little too much teasing for my taste, but Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is really doing something unique. It feels almost more like what you'd expect from like The Wire or an HBO show you don't expect from a big blockbuster movie or a big Hollywood movie nowadays. They usually have a good guy and a bad guy, and this film doesn't have either, and then it's the main person I want to follow throughout it are apes. They're not humans. Frankly, the humans didn't seem as interesting to me when I was watching it, and I love that about this film. And the apes are speaking in sign language with subtitles. I mean, it's a over $100 million film where a majority of it is in subtitles, and the audience wasn't bored that I went with. And visually, it works very well. It's not hindered by its subtitles, especially at the beginning. I think towards the end battle sequence doesn't work as well for my money. Otherwise, it works very well visually and has some really great battle sequences in it. And it shows what Matt Reeves can do. You know, I was really not a fan of him after Let Me In, and I never thought he could really come back from that, and I'd kind of written him off. I was actually really disappointed he was doing this film, and he is making me eat my words, because I thought he directed this film very well and a real command over the story and what he's doing and how he's portraying these characters showed that he really cares about these characters characters. It's not necessarily a perfect film, but certainly one of the best written summer blockbusters. Not that that's saying much. It's probably one of the few science fiction summer blockbusters that really has a social conscience to it and is doing something different with its storytelling. How many films, when they have strange creatures, focus more on the human element than the strange creatures? Godzilla is a great example, actually, because it mainly focuses on the humans. This is the opposite of Godzilla, because you get to spend most of the time with the apes, and frankly, you prefer to hang out with the apes, while also not finding either side evil. It portrays it more even-handedly, and makes you think about these conflicts, bring you into the story. It brings you so deep into the story. You think about conflict in general and war and why people are driven to certain conflicts and why these things happen. It's anti-war, but it also understands why wars happen. It's probably going to have me think more about what these characters' motivations say about really human nature and guns, and anytime a gun's involved, something bad seems to happen. I guess I'm just surprised at how well-rounded it is and how well-rounded it is about conflict. And you don't really see that in summer blockbusters. They just want to have the cool action sequence. And this does have cool action sequences, but it really wants those big action sequences to really matter. They have a big action war sequence was more about the horrors of war. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is the kind of character-based big studio blockbuster that we really should have more of. It's not a summer blockbuster where you have to give up thinking about story to enjoy it. This is both a thinking man's summer blockbuster, but also a film that you'll really like as a regular mainstream audience member. And much like the best of the Planet of the Apes films, this kind of shows you why this franchise was such a big deal. Even if you thought it was a stupider franchise before, this demands you look at it. It might be a silly idea that the planet eventually gets taken over by apes. When an entry in a franchise like this is so good that you can't deny it, I think that says more than anything about these films. And Dawn of the Planet of the Apes lives up to that legacy, much like all the better films in the Planet of the Apes franchise. So if you have seen Dawn of the Planet of the Apes and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Also, recently I did a review of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, and that is up right now. You can click on the annotation below and check that out. And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.